Okay, so today we're going to talk about the best book on communication that almost nobody has read. So when most people want to get better at communication, they read books like How to Make Friends and Influence People or How to Talk to Anyone. And those are both great books, but they mostly deal with fairly non-hostile situations, like meeting people for the first time, going on sales calls, or going to a party. But the book I want to talk about today is more about dealing with hostile, adversarial sort of situations, which might range from being overlooked or ignored at work, to arguing with your partner, to dealing with like a potentially violent criminal. It's called Conflict Communication by Rory Miller, and it makes the point that things that can feel quite personal are often quite impersonal, because they're just patterns of behaviour that nobody is immune to because they've existed for hundreds of thousands of years. Humans are successful because we're social animals. We need connection, but some of the systems that we've developed to ensure that connection aren't actually that helpful in the modern world. I'm not going to summarise the whole thing because you really should get it and read it, but I will talk about the most important lessons I think I took from it and how they've changed the way I communicate with other people. As always, timestamps in the description if you want to flip around, otherwise let's just get into it. Part 1. The 3 brains. Okay, so maybe the most important concept to take from the book is that we have what Miller refers to as 3 brains. Those are the lizard, the monkey, and the human. So the lizard is the oldest part of your brain. It's the hindbrain. It hasn't changed that much from what you'd find in other animals, and it triggers stuff like your fight and flight reflexes. It loves rituals and habits, and it hates change. The monkey brain corresponds to your limbic system, or your emotional brain, and it's almost completely concerned with status, social behavior, and what other people think of you. The human brain, or the neocortex, is the part of your brain that's rational but also very slow. Gathering evidence and forming opinions takes time, and by the time you've done that, quite often one of the other bits of your brain is kicked in and taken over. So this isn't a million miles from Dr. Steve Peters' conception of the brain as monkey, computer, and human. But where it really differs is that Miller focuses heavily on how ruthless the lizard is. All the lizard cares about is survival, and all that it knows is that whatever you're doing right now has kept you alive so far, and so it will often keep repeating destructive and dangerous patterns of behaviour on the basis that they haven't got you killed yet. Meanwhile, the monkey brain can't distinguish between humiliation and death. Back in the days when your tribe was all you had, being kicked out of it was almost like breaking your leg. It was basically like a death sentence. And so the monkey is all about keeping you in your social groups and avoiding humiliation at almost all costs. So it's part of the reason why people stay in bad relationships or hate doing karaoke. And this is kind of fundamental to understanding everything else that's in the book. Your human brain is working slower than your other 2 brains, which are concerned with resisting change and keeping your social group intact. Which brings us to, your responses are usually automatic. Let's try an experiment. Which of these shirts do you like best and why? Pause the video while you decide if you like. Okay, so that's a trick question because your subconscious mind has chosen one straight away, and anything you say to rationalize the decision is something that your human mind's come up with after that decision has already been made. And this is how it works with a lot of things. Your responses to everything from like large-scale political decisions to what someone says in a meeting usually happen automatically, and then your human brain rationalizes the decision you've already made about them later. And the science backs this up. Researchers have actually found that they can detect your decisions occurring in your brain up to 10 seconds before you're actually aware of them. Miller points out that these key signs usually show that the monkey has taken over. If you're feeling emotional, if you're starting to dislike the other person, if you're starting to label the other person, and crucially, if your focus shifts from trying to solve the problem in front of you to proving that you're right. So you might have heard the saying, you can accomplish almost anything if you don't care who gets the credit. And the opposite's also true. If you're focused on winning interactions, then you're much less likely to get anything done. So how do you get around this? You ask yourself, what's the monkey problem? Solving problems should be easy. You identify the problem, you prioritize making a plan, you gather resources, and you execute the plan. The way this gets derailed is through monkey problems, which are all related to status, territory, or protocols. So as an example of this, when I was working on Men's Fitness magazine, the company I was working with launched a new free weekly magazine based on fitness with a new editor. Now, I thought I knew quite a lot about fitness and magazines at the time, so I kind of walked into the publisher's office, said, "Hey, let me help you with this magazine I hear you're making," and got completely ignored. And that's because I thought I was being helpful, but what I was actually doing was walking into someone else's territory, undermining their status and challenging their authority. Sometimes when you think you're helping someone with doing their job, what you're actually doing is telling them they can't do their job, and their monkey is going to react badly. So how should I have handled that situation? If I'd walked into the office and acknowledged the hierarchy and said, look guys, I know you know a lot more about what you're going for than me here, but I had a couple of ideas that I wouldn't mind kicking around with you. You can just let me know if I've gone crazy. Then there would have been a much better chance of them listening to me. And this is somewhere that Miller's advice does actually dovetail with what's in How to Make Friends and Influence People. The aim in a lot of social interactions is to raise the other person's social status without being insincere. You try to make the other person feel good about themselves and secure in their authority, because that is how you get things done. Group dynamics. Okay, so another thing I found very useful was Miller's description of group dynamics. He explains it this way. There are longevity-focused groups and goal-orientated groups, and their differences in their dynamics and rules is what causes a lot of conflict across organisations of all different sizes. So goal-oriented groups are all about getting the job done, and they value hard work and creativity. The ultimate goal-oriented groups are things like task forces and special forces teams, but they can just as easily be the people on the ground getting the job done, producing the stuff that your company sells. Longevity-oriented groups exist to perpetuate the group. They're about making sure the organisation survives into the future. So getting the job done is important to them, but they also have to worry about existential threats to the group, like big lawsuits or negative media attention. And this is something that can cause a lot of tension. If you're one of the staff on the ground, you can feel like you're the only person who's earning their salary because you're ultimately making the thing the company sells. Meanwhile, the people in longevity-focused groups know that they're the ones fending off threats that nobody else is aware of. This is kind of exemplified by that famous William Francis Butler line. The nation that will insist on drawing a broad line of demarcation between the fighting man and the thinking man is liable to find its fighting done by fools and it's thinking done by cowards. Or in other words, when each group thinks the other one is full of idiots, it makes for a really toxic work environment. And the real trick to dealing with it is to promote good crossovers between those two groups. But if you aren't in charge of that stuff, it at least helps to know why they differ, because any organisation needs both. Okay, so the final part of the book that I found really helpful combines all the other stuff into something that you can practically do, and that is called active listening. It's something that they teach to counsellors and police officers, but it's also helpful for just talking to the people that you want to have better relationships with. The two key elements are, you receive the information as clearly, accurately and completely as possible, and the other person wants to keep talking. And that sounds obvious, but how often do you have a conversation where you're pretty sure you know what the other person is going to say next, and you just want to kind of get on with that script? If you're already thinking of the next thing you're going to say while the other person is talking, you're not really listening to them. You're just waiting for your turn to speak. So as an experiment, the next time you're talking to someone, try really listening to what they have to say before you think of a response. It will slow down the pace of the conversation, but that's fine because it lets them know you're listening and it makes the communication clearer. So something that's commonly taught in active listening is something called reflecting. And if you do it wrong, it can sound really cringe. Like if you go, "So what I'm hearing you saying is..." Instead, your goal should be to deliver this same idea but in your own voice. So for me, that goes something like, "So hang on, let me just make sure I'm understanding this properly." Active listening is something that I found really powerful in both work and regular life. It lets the other person know you're paying attention, and it helps you understand what they need from you more clearly. And really, it's also kind of the end result of everything else in the book. It's about getting you away from the automatic reactions and patterns that form so much of the rest of your life and helping you think like a human instead of a lizard or a monkey. So that's ConCom, and there's a ton more in it, including advice on relationships and dangerous situations. But if you only take one thing away from it or this video, it's that you will succeed in more situations if you are aware of when you're becoming emotional and the effect that is having on your ability to communicate. Thanks for listening. Go listen.